fit and the essentials of iterating your product to suit the market demands without overspending. Having said that, really quickly, I want to thank again Cameron over at the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Sac State. They are co-sponsoring this 4-part series with the Technology Futures Group. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Technology Futures Group, we're actually a specialty grant-funded program under the broader Northern California Small Business Development Center umbrella. We provide Northern California-based startups with the resources and the strategy to move faster, build bigger. We've got a group of both general as well as specialty advisors. And we're very proud of our accomplishments over the last year. We've helped founders raise over $800 million in equity financing and receive over $70 million in grants, creating more than 2,700 jobs. Having said that, a couple of reminders. Number one, please submit your Q&A in the chat window. I'll be monitoring that. Number two, you're going to see a poll that's going to pop up in a little while. Please, if you have a chance, respond to that poll. It will give us a little bit better review as to the demographics on the call today, so we can try to fine-tune things in parallel. And then the last thing is, this session will be recorded. We will send out a follow-up email, which will contain both a copy of the presentation as well as a recording of the presentation in case you want to replay it. So having said that, I am going to turn the session over to Steve Plume, one of my fellow TFG advisors, to take it from here.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome everyone. As Jeff just mentioned, I'm launching the poll now. So if you could take a minute as we go through these, kind of some logistics and agenda and fill that in, that'd be great. We'll close it at around slide, 4 or 5 slides in, and Andy and Paul will apply their AI hyperspace super duper server things to figure out what it meant between slides 5 and 6. So as Jeff mentioned, of course, this is the second session in the investment readiness series, product development and product market fit. We're going to do some very brief introductions of the speakers, recap a little bit about the series, and then dive in. And as Jeff mentioned, please do use chat for Q&A. If it makes sense to pause in the flow, we'll do that. And otherwise, we'll stack them up for the end. So Jeff introduced himself. I'm Steve Plume. I'll be doing most of the discussion today. With help from Andy, Paul, and Nils. In my day job, I run a small early stage venture capital firm, which is one of the reasons I got asked to do this. Andy, Paul, Nils, if you'd each do a 1 or 2 sentence intro so everybody has context, then we'll dive in. Andy, you're first.
I'll jump in. This is Andy Leventhal. I am an advisor at TFG, Tech Futures Group. I've been in startup land for the better part of 35 years in a variety of companies on the sales, go-to-market, business development, partnerships, strategy side. And I've also done international for most of that time. And bring a deep lens into the climate world. I've been doing climate technology for about 15 years.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. Paul Bozzo. I'm an advisor with Technology Futures Group, and I'm a technology specialist. I do a lot of work in go-to-market, but particularly a lot of work in seed and early stage funding, all different types, equity, SBA, SBIR, angel VC. So I'll actually be doing module 4, the last session in our series, all about funding. So hope you can join then.
Great. And Nils, please.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. My name is Nils Davis. Nils rhymes with pills. I have a 30-year career in enterprise software product management, working at one point with Stephen, which is my connection to this group. I now coach and consult product managers on a variety of things, as well as businesses. I have lots of insights into how to make successful products built through both successes and failures. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so, and that also help give some context as you think about questions or discussion, backgrounds of each of us of who you might want to point the question towards. Okay, so as we've already mentioned, this is the second in a four-part series. Last week we did customer validation for those of you who were on that. Next week will be go to market. And then as we've already mentioned, Paul will do investor readiness. But one thing I really want to emphasize, we talked about it last week, we'll talk about it in depth this week. This is so much a process, not a linear series of checkboxes. You are going to find yourself going 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and a step to the side. And that means you're doing it right. Don't be discouraged. We'll talk later about reasons for failure, but skipping this process and not doing it right and allowing yourself and your investors possibly to fall into confirmation bias is one of the major reasons things go wrong. So as I said, if you're doing the job right, you're working towards the main theme in these webinars, which is investment readiness. And what that means is de-risking your company for the institutional investor. Friends and family are one thing. Most angels are kind of in that same bucket. But really what we're trying to put the lens on here is, what do institutional investors need to hear in order to consider your company for funding? Which really means, what work do you put in before you meet with them? And the issue is, get to the head of the line. I didn't repeat the slides from last week, but you'll recall somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of companies actually get funded at that first institutional stage. And only about 25 to 30% of companies get the second round. You want to be in those top percentiles, whatever they are. And again, one reminder from last week, any sophisticated investor is not looking just at this round, they're looking at the next round as well. And so everything you do in this investment readiness, you got to be thinking about both those particular points in time. Let's keep switching. So just to frame things and put a box around what product development means in the context of startup. Here's one way to think about financing benchmarks. And I'd be careful, because depending on what market you're in, the dollar values of how large the round is may vary by, as much as an order of magnitude. Yes. You could really see that with a big complex infrastructure project, for example. So there are different versions of this out here. I've copied one from dealroom.net onto the slide. There are some others at the URL you see in the bottom. The thing to focus on here really is, what's the expectation from the investor as to where you are at each stage? And so pre-seed and so on. You've done a first pass through customer validation, and you've really kind of nailed what gets referred to as the problem solution fit. You move to that next round. Now they're expecting you to use the money to establish product market fit and launch your go-to-market. And then as you get to A, or things get papered in different ways. These are convenient categories. That's the money that's going to allow you to scale. And I'd really urge you, and I'm going to try to remember to repeat this here and there. And my colleagues, I hope, will keep me honest. It is iterative, and you can't skip. You read in the paper or in the media about companies that skip steps and hit the grand slam. Those are one out of, those are the proverbial unicorns. Those are one out of millions. And really to get it right, you're going to have to go step by step by step. And as we said, sometimes backwards. Okay, let's see. I wanted, it looks like about half the gang has, let me just look, I'm looking at the live polls here. So it looks like 2/3 of the people who've answered haven't started to raise an institutional round yet, and about 1/3 are currently trying. So I'm going to leave the poll for like 2 more minutes and then shut it down. So if you haven't had a chance yet, And I do see some chats about it doesn't fit. Sorry, we tried to align them with Cameron. I guess we didn't quite get it right. But as far as the industry goes, if you don't fit one of those, stick other, and that looks like a substantial number. But I think the stage is working out, and who you sell to is working out, and product is kind of working out. So okay, we'll do a better job for next time. So we could do an entire product development. We're going to dip very briefly into specifics, partially because they're going to vary so much by what sector your company is in, the nature of your company itself, and especially with methodologies and tools. I just don't think it's a good use of anybody's time to get into the civil wars that develop over these things, especially as they evolve over time and the tools change. So I think what we want to convey is a set of organizing principles around what your product development needs to look like. And then we'll dive into the deeper question of product market fit. So first principle, you can phrase this in any way you want, but do the most important stuff first and as quickly as you can. Cannot emphasize enough the scarcest resource in a startup is time. You are in a race against competition, you are in a race against markets, and you are in a race against how much capital you've raised. And so you have to get there. And there is a certain seduction to digging into systems and tools and processes to make it as efficient as possible. Don't get sucked in. Develop what you need to develop as fast as you can, even if it's inefficient, because that friction will not kill your company, but lost time will. And the subset, especially for the people in this audience, is the scarcest resource your company has is elapsed time. The scarcest resource you have is your time. Money is secondary. So make sure that both as a company, as an individual, you're focused on that which matters the most. Third point is everything's harder and takes longer and costs more. And I think it's safe to say, Paul and Andy and Jeff can disagree if they wish. I'm trying to think of any entrepreneur in my entire experience who has not come in and say, we will get this done in this amount of time, and been wrong by at least 2x. And this is just a truism of when you're sitting there in your first pitch meeting and you're showing the financials or it's in due diligence, the person across the table from you is already thinking, okay, if this takes long, costs twice as much, and the revenues are off by half, can I still get my money back? That's the analysis that's going through their minds. And so you really want to be careful about your job as we go through this is to counteract that as much as possible, which means being as accurate as possible. Just checking the notes here. Okay, so with that, let's just spend 2 quick slides on kind of foundational stuff. And I would put all these factors in there. Your tools and your systems, your process and your organization in particular. Your investor's going to want to know, do you have tools? Good. Do you have a process? Good. That's really all they care about. If you get some real tech weenie in your third due diligence meeting, maybe you're talking about it and justifying it, but don't worry about it too much. Team and skills, of course, super important. Your lead technologist in particular, but that's idiosyncratic to people's backgrounds and industries and companies. Your tech stack's going to matter quite a bit, but that's part of the development issue. So just make sure. I'll just click to the next slide and tell you what to make sure of.
Actually, Steve, just to
please,
because venture fundraising takes so long. Part of the reason it takes so long is that an investor is going to want to see your progress over time. So it's going to look like this is relationship building, and they're going to say, this is great. We'd love to see how, and they're going to ask you 3 or 4 questions and send you off in your merry way to come back to them with something. And ultimately, they want to see whether you are delivering on the things you said you were going to do after the first, the second, third, and maybe 4th and 5th meetings. So to his foundational slide here, your team and field, all these things, they want to continue to see how you're chipping away, and did you do the things you said you were going to do?
Yep. So that brings us to product market fit. And I'm going to, I guess I'm going to read some of the polls because, well, here we go, share the results. So everybody's seeing these in real time. And so I think panel members just be aware of what we got here. Here's the split by climate tech sector and these others here. So 8 out of the 14, having looked at the chat a little bit, I think most of those are in biotech. We've got so a third in prototyping.
Can you scroll down? Can you scroll down on the survey results?
I think I am scrolling.
We're only seeing.
You can scroll your own.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so
Yeah.
scrolling to number 2, you see ideation, prototyping, development, testing, launch. Who are we selling to? 20% to enterprise, 20% to SMB, roughly a third to consumer, and the rest split between utility and government. We've got some hardware and a bunch of other, which I assume is biotech. And then 60-40, haven't started raising and trying. Okay, so that's where we stand, folks. Okay, so let's, I think product fit seems pretty relevant to a number of those. And then you said, it never stops. So what is product market fit? You can find all kinds of definitions. The second one here, I've found lots of resources that say Marc Andreessen originated the term. I'm pretty sure I heard the term before Marc Andreessen never hit anybody's radar, but we'll give him credit. The real question is, these are easy to understand. So the real question becomes, how do you get there? And okay, sure, Steve, you've been telling us about process and stuff for a long time. Well, here's why. The top reason startups fail is because there's no market need. And these are, so how could they possibly get there? One issue is it doesn't solve a problem. No one needs it. It's at the wrong price. So this means either the company didn't do their customer validation up front, they did it poorly, and what that usually means is that they fell into confirmation bias and they heard what they wanted to, rather than taking a scientific approach to it and forming a hypothesis, making a prediction, checking the results against hypothesis, and then reforming the hypothesis and moving on. They skipped from customer validation to trying to scale and left out basically everything else we're going to talk about today, or they never got to a reasonable, repeatable sales model. And so another of the major takeaways from today, if you will, please, is finding product market fit, nomenclature notwithstanding, is not just about product. It's about your whole business model. And we're going to look at that more today and especially next week. So then what's interesting is, okay, same survey, CB Insights. They're good people to subscribe to if you don't. Second most common reason is they ran out of cash. This is silly to me. To be possibly a little bit morbid, but my father was a heart surgeon, so I lived in this world, right? Why do people die? Everybody dies because their heart stops and they have heart failure. Okay, so this is just a symptom. Why did they run out of?
Yeah.
Well, they ran out of cash because this is the next set of reasons behind this poll. And you'll note, for those of you keeping score at home, we're way over 100%. So clearly this was a multiple choice survey. This is rank order, number 1, number 2, and get out competed as number 3 on the list. Everything on this list translates to, we didn't get product market fit. These are all just different ways of saying that. So really, when you get that right down to it, if you take the first and the second, like 100% of companies fail because they didn't get to product market fit, and then they may have had other problems as well. A couple of highlight here that are in that expanded definition of product market fit are pricing and cost issues, right? You haven't gotten the value proposition and the price point and willingness to pay right. Poor marketing, one could argue that's about, you didn't get your go-to-market right. And lose focus, we'll talk shortly about how important it is to start with a narrow customer segment. And lose focus is a symptom of a company trying to do too many things at once or too many things too early. So I said shortly, everybody, we picked these companies probably because everybody knows them. Paul, I think you've got the talk track here.
No, Andy.
Andy, sorry.
Yeah, so we picked some pretty well-known names, and as you might see here, they're climate related, and we thought about this quite a bit. Steve just talked a lot about reasons for failure and how companies did not do well. Here are some examples of companies that did quite well. Picking a narrow segment, Prius started as part of Toyota, coming out with a hybrid car, a 40 horsepower electric motor as their hybrid engine in a gas-powered car, and blew the doors off the industry for the first time. No one had ever seen a successfully driven manufactured car that was sort of green and clean, and did an incredible job. It launched in America in 2000, and as most of you know, throughout most of the first 10 or 12 years of its existence was just a massive success. Tesla also, incidentally, I did look it up. Prius had a 50 horsepower electric motor. Tesla's mid-range Model 3 has a 500 horsepower car, and that's not even high end in the electric vehicle industry anymore. But targeting people who really cared about, they didn't care about price, they cared about performance, and that they were doing the right thing. So it was a narrow segment of the universe back in when Tesla launched the first Roadster. They worked the angle of sort of hitting the emotional strings of people who cared about environmental issues, but they worked the regulatory framework. They got tax incentives for both, actually, the Prius and the Tesla, and really worked a narrow segment of a very, very large market. Sunrun, an early solar provider, although not the first company, they invented the solar lease and created a financial instrument that allowed people who cared a lot about environmental, do good, reduce dependency on fossil fuels, reduce dependency on utilities, but by coming out with a financial instrument that said, hey, you don't need to own your electricity, your solar panels on the roof. You can lease them. And that created a monthly payment for people. That was just an incredible innovation. And lastly, Nest, the sleepiest industry in the world was the thermostat industry. Did we just lose? There we go. Thermostats. And they came up with a sexy, cool little device that was inexpensive, but sexy looking, cool, and you could have control over your energy. You got a rebate from your utility, and allegedly, you would save money on your utility bill, and it would actually learn your behaviors, and it would actually become a learning thermostat. And it took an industry by surprise and became a household product that have sold millions and millions of units around the world. So these are a couple of simple examples of narrow, segmented opportunities that we tried to choose some pretty well-known names that everyone here would know, whatever industry you're coming from. And then obviously putting a lot of attention on that learning cycle. How are people using things? What do they like about it? That customer validation process rolling into product market fit was critical for the success of these companies.
Thanks, Andy. And so what they nailed was not just the product solution fit. They also nailed the narrow customer segment, as Andy mentioned, what that customer segment wanted. And so unusually in most of our worlds, but possibly applicable for many of you, there's a non-economic incentive for that first set of early adopters. They're trying to, as Andy said, they're trying to do the right thing. That's unusual in the world of commercial enterprise software, for example. So take advantage of it. And then they got the price points right for that segment.
Actually, in many cases, price was not a high component, right? So they found a segment for, certainly for Tesla's case, it wasn't cheap. It was very expensive. And that thermostat was actually pretty expensive for a thing that you probably moved into your house and there was one on the wall and no one ever thought about changing it. So people were willing to spend money because it wasn't the number one priority. Whereas obviously in many products and many other segments, price is super important. So knowing your customer through your validation process, that should become quite obvious. Is this a high driver to adoption or not?
There we go. So what you want to roll up is problem solution fit, right? Which we talked about last week. That's what you're going to exit customer validation with. Yes. Okay. Well, I've identified the pain. I know how to treat it, and I have an identified ideal customer profile that wants my solution and has indicated willingness to pay. So then, of course, as we get into the theme of, well, now you have to build it. Of course, you got to get features and functionality right. And something to think about there really is competitive differentiation, both against, both is an understatement, right? Against established players, against other competitors trying to do what you're doing or similar, and against in-house DIY, this is the way we've always done it solutions, which are going to be just fine for probably 97, 98% of the market when you launch. Because you're after, I like that circle. As we've mentioned a couple times in the last few minutes, it's that narrow segment of a massive market that you're after. Steve Blank, I think, coined the term the early evangelists, which is kind of a portmanteau word behind the crossing the chasm, early adopters and evangelists. But they're the people you're after, right? Peter Thiel's comment on every great company has been built on the backs of a small group of committed users. Pricing we've just hit. Of course, willingness to pay is a big one. And then the pricing has to link up with your financial model. We will talk more about this next week when we talk about go-to-market. But they're pretty well established bounds of what's the price point, and therefore what does your channel have to be. And you've got to do the math between what's your customer acquisition cost and what's your revenue per customer and your lifetime customer value. That's LTCV if you don't know that acronym. These all have to line up. And it's amazing the number of early stage companies that come through who haven't even thought about those connections, much less made the math line up. And then lastly, it's the channel partner model, which has a whole lot of overlap with what I was just talking about in the economics, but it's also the whole product components. Okay, if you're selling a consumer device like a Nest thermostat, basically you got to get it on your wall, and there's not a whole lot else in the whole product. But if you're in something that is a dashboard enterprise software, you may need a lot of APIs, you may need integration, you may need professional services to help configure. Who knows? There's all kinds of stuff that might be involved. And so all of this is in the expansive definition of let's get to product market fit. So once again, of course, the key question is how. This is what we presented last week, right? Discovery through product solution fit, willingness to pay, and then scaling. I've said it already once, and I'm sure I'll say it again. This process never ends. When we were talking about this yesterday, Andy had the great example. Apple is still doing this for the iPhone, right? How many years later and how many billions of dollars in profit later? This happens every single year with their new releases. They're doing customer validation. Pick any successful product you want. This is going on all the time. So in our learning model, you've been through last week's customer validation process. Now you're here. And what have we got? Okay, we've got an ideal customer profile. We've got the target entry segments. We've got the early evangelists. We know what their pain is because we started with a weak signal and we worked on through to a strong signal. We know where that sits in the priority stack. And so you're not fourth on a list of 3. And we know the value of the cure. Now we got to go build it. Great. So a lot of companies say, oh, we've done the validation. That means we know what market, minimum viable product is, and that's product market fit. And so now it's time to scale. No, this is the route to failure. This is skipping too many steps and not really understanding what minimum viable product is and what product market fit is. Once you've finished with customer validation, you are probably 18 to 24 months away from a commercially successful product. Remember, everything takes twice as long and twice as hard and twice as expensive. So let's stay with these axes along the whole. How we've labeled it fidelity to vision, but it's also cumulatively how much money have you spent, how much time have you taken. I mentioned last week I've become more and more convinced, especially in software, the key metric is capital efficiency. How far can you get on how little money? The vertical axis is the cost of doing each of these items, and it's also how much you learn from each step. And so my recommended theme here is spend a little money, create a lot of value, learn a lot, and then lather, rinse, repeat. So that looks something more like this. Now, again, this is going to vary tremendously by what product you're selling, what industry you're in. This is more of a software or a software embedded model. We can talk about more of a hardware model. But with software, and I'm going to I will steal but attribute the line to Nils. Software does not have to obey the laws of physics, which is just a beautiful thing, right? You don't have cost of goods. You don't have a supply chain. You can do all kinds of things. So you can just start with a landing page and measure how much interest and traffic there is and do your A/B testing, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, et cetera testing. Now you can do some click-throughs. And ultimately you're going to get to a V1 and then V2 and beyond. Nils, this is your theme here. You want to expand upon it a little bit?
Yeah, mostly the concept here is you're just continuing to reduce risk with each of these experiments. These are you can think of them as experiments. You have a hypothesis that people will be interested in this, so test the hypothesis by seeing if people will go to a landing page and give you their email. This is a very simple MVP in it's sometimes called. A click-through prototype lets you test to see, oh, I have this idea for how the product should work. Let me test it with some possible customers and see if they understand it. The thin thread version is more of a validation of, oh, do I actually know how to make all the pieces come together? And the V1 is really the first thing you try to go out there and actually sell and make money with. But they're all related to reducing risk in a sort of managed and structured way. That's all it really is. It seems obvious if you put it this way. It's actually hard to do in reality because we think we know the answer already. And the problem is we usually don't know the answer. The answer we think we know is not right. And that's the big challenge for a lot of these. Well, all those companies that failed because there was no market need. Somebody thought there was, but they were wrong. You don't want to be that company.
And so another way to think about this is what currency is the customer paying you with at each of these stages? Landing page, they're paying you with their interest. And you're seeing what generates the greatest amount of interest. A prototype, they're paying you with their time. These might be your alpha customers or unpaid beta customers. And they're going to spend time using it. They're going to spend time talking to you about what works and what doesn't work. They're going to invest at a lower level than you are, but they are also invested in you getting to the right solution. And the V1 is the first thing they're actually paying you for in the currency of cash. And I have lived this story where we found a whole lot of customers who were very willing to pay us with their time, but when we then went and said, hey, how about some cash, things fell apart. You don't want to be in that, right? Learn as you go through each of these. And I thought this was another great quote, right? If you're not disappointed in your V1 release, you put too much into it. There should be so much more on top of what you're doing in V1, so you can figure out really how to hit the bullseye on your target customer segment, and then as you go beyond. And what you're going to hear here, and last week we talked about when you're done with customer validation, you've probably got 70 to 80% of product market fit. That might be an exaggeration because these are all things we've heard. Why do you have that? We would never do it that way. Or the expanded version of the bottom one is, I understand what you think you're doing here, but that's not what we call it. And so none of the people you actually want to use it are going to understand it that way, so they won't use it that way. And there's an infinite number of these. Most of them are unexpected. Again, you're looking for the unknown unknowns. So inherently, you don't know what they're going to say. And the point is to cut, change, prioritize. Right. And so we link this to something else we've been talking about today, the 2 times longer and 2 times more expensive. You're very unlikely to be able to deliver your whole product vision in V1. So it's forcing you to pare and cut and trim to get to what is absolutely the most important stuff that aggregates to that V1 that someone will pay you money for. Great. So how do you know when you're there? There's a standard survey. You can find it online. It's referred, at least in some places, it's referred to as the Sean Ellis method. SurveyMonkey has a great template for this. You'll find it in other sources. It's 5 or 6 questions. But the key one is, how disappointed would you be if you couldn't have this product any longer? If we took this away from you and you weren't allowed to touch it, how would you feel? And really, you want to be targeting 40% or more are going to tell you there's some version of devastated. Like, wow, my job would suck if I didn't have your product anymore. That's what you're after. And I gave you some real life quotes from in last session that we've heard in different ways along the ways. If they're telling you they'll be devastated, they're the people who are going to be asking, can they be on your customer advisory board? Can they invest in your company? Can they have a job with you? That's when you know you've really, really nailed it. A second thing is tracking and monitoring. And I'm always amazed how many companies miss the opportunity to instrument the usage metrics into their products. And with some things, I understand that's impossible, but really, and you can create a long list of these. But at the overview, trying to figure out how many people of what different user roles, if you have multiple user roles, are using which features for how long and how often, right? What's the usage? And if you're looking at your dashboard every morning and realizing that only 20% of your beta customers are signing into their system every day, you need to go back and recalibrate. If everyone, you can see it's the first thing they sign on to, okay, you're doing really well. And you can interpolate all the different versions of that. And then the third set, of course, as we move towards go-to-market, is sales metrics. And so, Andy, again, this is your domain.
Yeah. So a lot of what we've covered over the last maybe 5 or 10 minutes has been very product market fit. Obviously comes out of an engineering product orientation, but I come at this with a sales lens. So I have sat in front of many VCs who want to get into that pipeline metrics. And so their lens is, okay, great. So it sounds like you've got some customers using the product, and CEOs who haven't maybe gone through this process may get really excited to sort of sell on how great the pipeline is. But getting into that, let's actually look at your CRM or your spreadsheet and see what's actually happening with your customers. What's the conversion rate of people who touched it the first time 6, 12 months ago? Where are they now? How many of them are actually going to be paying users? If they haven't already, will they be paying users? And when I call them, what will they say? Because VCs will call your customers. I don't care what industry you're in. If it's biotech, climate, software, automotive, it doesn't matter. They will talk to your customers. How many users did you start the beta with, and how many do you have now? That's both at company level, and then, as Steve just mentioned, how many users are there in each company? How many minutes, hours, days are they spending on the platform per week? Is it growing? What's the growth rate? How do we get it to double from where it is right now? Are people so in love with the product that they can be references? Will they talk to the VCs? Will they be splashing your name on your website when you do a press release? Will they be the ones there to say, yes, we love this thing? So those are like raving fans, and you want that. And this is all stuff that's related to, is it good product market fit? How viral are these customers? Whether it's a consumer product or enterprise, there still needs to be a really good expanded user base that's measurable. And and then earlier slide that Steve had showed was, he put the big, MVP does not equal product market fit. Can you sell your product in all industries, or at least to all people with that title in multiple companies in multiple industries? Do all director level people with a certain title buy this product? Because that tells you what kind of salespeople or business development people you want or should have on your team. If your CEO or you as a CEO is still doing all the closing and you just have some junior salespeople and you're there to make sure every deal closes successfully because every one of them is a one-off, you're not ready at scale. So these are all sales-oriented lenses to the product market fit question. So what's the health of your pipeline and your CRM?
Yeah, and these are specifics you should be tracking. I'll just say one of Andy's points in another slightly different way to qualitatively. We already talked about last week. Come on, guys, you're founders. Your first 10, maybe first 20 sales are going to come from people you already know. Then you're going to start branching out and you're going to get into these pipeline metrics. And if you still, as Andy said, if you still need to go close the deal and you're cutting different contracts or forms of engagement with each customer, you haven't reached it yet. When kind of anyone on your team can close the deal, assuming they're reasonably qualified, and you just have to approve it, now you're in good shape.
Yeah.
And that takes me to, and so the quick summary of that is you're selling the same thing at the same price to the same group of similar customers. Okay, now you're there. And a great statement of that has been around the marketplace for a long time. Drum roll. This is from Mark Leslie. I highly recommend the Sales Learning Curve. I try to tell every one of my CEOs to read it at least once a year, even though it's probably 20 years old at this point. There are elements that if you find it, you will find they are absolutely dated, but the truisms remain. And when you've got so many inbounds that the reason you're losing the deals is you don't have time to respond, now you are ready to pour money on the fire and scale. That means you've nailed the product market fit. And that's where we're going to stop with most of the content from today. Just I want to point you to some resources that I drew on heavily in pulling this together and that I've drawn on over time. I just mentioned the HBR article. You can find free PDF downloads on it anywhere you want. Eric Ries's Lean Startup book is a classic. Again, some of the details are aging out, but the major themes of the Lean Startup and the Innovator's Dilemma by Christensen are I think they will continue to be true for as long as my career lasts. And then the final one I'd really recommend is Ben Horowitz's book. The first half of the book is kind of, I don't know, it's like an Indiana Jones movie in technology. It has good lessons in it. And the second half of the book are Horowitz's kind of best blog posts on moving from what we've been talking about, customer validation through product market fit to scale. I repeated this one from last time. If you weren't here last time, these were a lot of the resources we found that I particularly pulled on for customer validation. They also have a lot to say about product market fit and go to market. These are not one-trick ponies. They're good books, good websites. And with that, as I said, if you've got suggestions for next week, send one actionable suggestion to me. If you're shy and don't want to sell it to me, send it to Cameron and he'll roll them up. Mine is clearly going to be don't try to be host and presenter on Zoom at the same time. But we should welcome Cameron back next week to play that role. And with that, Mr. Smith, I turn it over to you for any questions that have been in the chat.
I've had lots in the chat. Many have been answered them for whatever reason.
We're only getting about every other word.
Oh. How's that better, Steve?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
better.
Sorry about that, you guys. I'm going to be anonymous. We've gotten lots of good questions online. Tried to answer many of those between several of us. Hey, please, if you need some more clarity around some of these great questions, please pipe up. If you have any new questions, please pipe up. If you have any personal stories, failures or successes around some of these subjects that you'd like to share with the crowd, I would definitely encourage you to please do that. Personally, I have lots of scars on my back from many failures. Had a couple of successes, so that's the good news. And then the only other thing I want to add, and then I'll shut up, is Steve, to your point, one of the things that I really try to focus on when I believe on product market fit is we talked about, raving customers and customer references and everything that I think Andy mentioned is great. But I also try to work really hard, particularly with my early adopter customers, and say, hey, listen, at the end of the day, it's going to be in both of our best interests to try to measure the ROI associated with us helping to solve this hair on fire problem that you may have. Because fundamentally, it's either going to help, drive revenue or reduce expenses or a little bit of both. But usually customers are really interested, early adopter customers are really interested in participating in that exercise. So we try to lay some groundwork up front. We try to lay down some metrics, some assumptions. We revisit it often if they're working with an MVP, and at the tail end of which it's a great tool, because in many instances it becomes an internal champion and sponsor to go and further advocate for us and get our solution in the budget for next year. And then obviously it's a really important tool that we can take home to reflect on how we can best present ROI going forward, and are there any things that we need to change in the future functionality of the solution or even the pricing. So anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's it then. Remind you that we're doing go to market next Thursday at the same time, and Paul will be doing investor readiness 2 weeks out at the same time. Thank you, everybody. Cameron will publish the video and the leave behind version of the document. And if there's nothing else, I'm going to stop the sharing and stop the recording. And thank everybody for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Great job, Steve.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.